Konami's Castlevania series is full of masterpiece games, and Castlevania Aria of Sorrow ranks highly among them. Following in the game design of Symphony of the Night, this entry in the series takes what Symphony did and expands upon it in interesting and unique ways. At the time that this game was released in 2003, this was a very unique style of game. The term Metroidvania was unheard of at the time, and the handheld Castlevania games are really the only ones to employ this exact style of gameplay. Much different from today, where it seems like a Metroidvania-style game is released at least once a month. Konami is releasing a handheld Castlevania game every year at this point, and Aria is the third and final game of the series on the Game Boy Advance. By this time, the Game Boy player for the GameCube was out, so you had an option to play on your handheld GBA or on a TV through your console. By the way, it seems like a lot of people are unaware of this, but if you find that the GameCube controller has a very awkward positioned buttons and D-pad for playing 2D games, you can actually plug in a Game Boy Advance into the Controller 2 port and use that as a controller instead. This game originally came out for the Game Boy Advance as a single release, and was re-released in the Castlevania Double Pack alongside Harmony of Dissonance, also for the GBA. If you don't have the ability to play these games on original hardware, the entire Game Boy Advance series is available digitally on the Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. There is almost nothing that I dislike about this game, with the possible exception of the atmosphere of the game. Castlevania started out with a very gothic style, and reminds me mostly of the Hammer horror movies of the 60s and 70s, with some inspiration from the Universal horror movies of the 30s and 40s. That style persisted through the 8 and 16-bit eras, but has been slowly changing over the years. I think that the anime cutscenes from Rondo of Blood is probably where it started, and Aria of Sorrow has gone full anime fantasy in its style. This shift in aesthetics and mood, originally derived from dreary ruins and medieval castles creating a sense of fear-filled horror, shifted to an almost comical high fantasy setting. It doesn't ruin the story or game, but it still makes me sad that a unique aesthetic has been retired from the Castlevania series. The game begins in the year 2035, making the Sorrow series the last games in the original Castlevania timeline. The character you control, Soma Cruz, is an exchange student in Japan. While visiting a shrine with his friend Mina during a solar eclipse, they are magically transported to Dracula's castle. Soma is almost immediately attacked by monsters, and while defending himself, learns that he has the dark power to absorb the souls of monsters. Absorbing a soul gives access to new magical powers. He meets several allies in Dracula's castle, as well as potential enemies. The first of which is Genya Iricado, or Alicardo as it would be pronounced by Japanese speakers, mostly pronouncing R's sort of as L's. This is a mysterious man who seems to know a lot about Dracula. He's accompanied by a member of the church, Yoko Belnades, a descendant of Sypha Belnades who assisted Trevor Belmont many centuries earlier. Soma also encounters a man who apparently has amnesia, going by the name of Jay. We learn that this is Julius Belmont, who in 1991 kills Dracula for the final time and banishes his castle into an eclipse along with himself. I'm not really sure how that works, since a solar eclipse isn't a physical thing, it's just an event where the moon passes between the sun and the earth, partially or fully obscuring the sun. You'll also encounter Graham, a man who is intent on claiming Dracula's power for himself. In order to escape alive, Soma will need to explore the castle and stop these dark powers from manifesting themselves. I thought that this was an interesting twist for the series not to include Dracula as the villain in this game, establishing that Dracula was indeed destroyed finally in 1999. It was probably a good idea, as it allowed the producers to develop new villains for the series. I won't spoil any of the multiple endings that you can get in this game, but I will reveal that there are some really surprising plot twists towards the end. Like its predecessors, there are a series of things that must be completed in order to access the better endings, and there's a good chance that you'll end up with the bad ending the first time through. Luckily, the game preserves your save so you don't have to start over. In terms of gameplay, this is a true Metroidvania-style game. Dracula's castle is split up into numerous areas. Some of these will be familiar, such as the arena, chapel, or clock tower, while some areas like the dance hall, underground cemetery, or floating garden are new and unique landscapes to explore. The entire castle and all the areas are all continuous, and you can travel through them either by walking or by using warp points. You'll start the game at the castle entrance and you're free to explore. Many areas initially will be inaccessible until you find a way to access them. For instance, in the castle corridor, you'll see platforms that lead up into rooms that will take you to the inner quarters, but you'll be unable to jump high enough to access them. Some corridors are also blocked and can only be opened from the other side, allowing you to backtrack later in the game. There are hundreds of rooms to explore in this game, and you'll be doing a lot of backtracking as you gain new abilities, going back to previous areas to see if you can now access them and open up new places to explore. Along the way, you'll encounter 112 different types of monsters. Each area includes a boss fight as well, where you'll take on a giant monster of some kind. I found these boss fights to be on par in terms of difficulty with the bosses from Symphony of the Night. I didn't have much trouble with most of them. I only recall having to fight the giant and the final boss multiple times. Just like Symphony, you'll collect all sorts of weapons, armor, and items along the way. There's even a shop that you can access at the beginning, run by a soldier that got stuck in the castle named Hammer. While you can buy weapons and armor, the best equipment must be found throughout the castle. Many of these are hidden behind breakable walls, or stashed in places that require some careful exploration and finesse to acquire. Items include healing potions, magic replenishing potions, items to cure status ailments, and of course, various meats either dropped by enemies or found inside walls. You acquire money by killing enemies and by breaking candles, just like previous Castlevania games. There are also maps that you can find that will fill out some of the areas that you haven't explored, and there are several key items that reveal clues about what you need to do in order to get the true ending. I found these clues to be a lot more helpful than the ones you get in Symphony of the Night, but at the same time, they're cryptic enough that you'll have to think your way through each clue. Also, like Symphony of the Night, you'll gain experience points by killing enemies. Gain enough and you'll level up. This increases your stats as well as gives you more hit points and magic points. Where Aria of Sorrow improves on Symphony's game design is the soul system. Soma has the ability to absorb the soul of almost every enemy in the game. I had to look it up, and 110 of the 112 enemies have an absorbable soul. Each soul grants Soma a different power that will assist him in the game. Enemies can release a soul when you kill them. This is determined by a base percentage for that enemy, offset by Soma's luck stat. Acquiring multiple souls from the same enemy type increases its power. Certain souls are mandatory, and you'll acquire them when defeating a boss. There are 4 different types of souls. Red souls give you different projectile attacks, and these act as replacements for the sub-items of previous games. Blue souls, known as guardian souls, can be turned on or off and provide support functions. Some examples of this is the ability to float through air, turn into a bat, or activate a force field to repel enemy attacks. Yellow souls are enchanted souls and give you stat boosts or immunities to certain status effects. You can only have one of each color equipped at any given time, and given that there are around 30 to 40 of each type, this gives you immense customability to your character. Many souls are relatively easy to acquire, so you'll be able to load out your character to play the game in whatever style you like. The only downside is that there are some rare souls that provide much more powerful abilities than the rest, and I found that myself using the same few soul abilities throughout most of the game, especially in the latter half. Finally, there are silver ability souls. Each one of them can be activated or deactivated, and there's no limit to how many of these are on at the same time. These include things like the double jump ability, or the ability to walk on water, among many other things. The control is superb. Soma's movement is very smooth, and he controls perfectly. His jumps are controllable, and he has a good range of moves including the backslide, crouching slide kick, and aerial drop kick. The only issue is that the GBA only has 2 face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons, meaning some features like a dedicated projectile attack button or a dedicated button to transform are missing. That means going back to pressing up and attack for your special moves, which can cause you to accidentally use an ability when you don't want to, wasting precious magic points, and having to equip the transformation ability over something else. The graphics are really good for the GBA. The backgrounds of each area are incredibly detailed, and some areas have multiple layers of scrolling. Each area has a different theme, so you won't get bored looking at this game. Character and enemy sprites are quite detailed, on par with Symphony of the Night, and most of the animations are pretty smooth. I say most because the giant weapon animation for Soma is comical at best. It reminds me of animation from Adult Swim shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force or C-Lab 2021. Other animation, like the area effects and soul abilities, look really good, and Soma has a unique animation for every weapon in the game. Previous games on the GBA had some graphical issues. Circle of the Moon was overly too dark, especially for non-backlit screens, and used far too much gray and brown tones throughout the game. Harmony of Dissonance overcompensated by giving the main character a huge glowing blue outline that was more distracting than helpful. I'm happy to say that Aria has fixed each of these issues. There's a good use of color and clean delineation between background objects and foreground sprites without the use of that annoying glow. The sound and music are good and well designed, but unfortunately, the Game Boy Advance has very poor sound design in its hardware. The low bitrate makes the music sound very scratchy, and that's unfortunate because Michiru Yamane, the composer from Bloodlines and Symphony of the Night, makes a return alongside a few other composers for an amazing soundtrack. Each area has its own song, and the style and tempo reflects the theme as well. Many of these songs will stick in your head, and you also get a new remix of Heart of Fire, the song that plays during the Grim Reaper stage of the original Castlevania. There's even a sound test on the main menu, so you can listen to all those songs in its glorious 11 kHz sampling rate. Despite the few drawbacks, mostly due to the hardware constraints, that was an amazing game. I started playing it over a weekend and ended up binging on the game until I 100% completed it. In terms of length, it's about as long as the initial castle in Symphony of the Night, which is only half of that game. I really do wish that this game was longer. The difficulty was also at the low end of the Castlevania games, even the Metroidvania ones. I'm pretty sure Konami was aware of that, because after beating the game, you unlock a hard difficulty mode. I actually wish that this was available from the start, as I probably would have chosen that for my first playthrough. You can also unlock a mode to play the game as Julius Belmont. This is similar to playing as Richter in Symphony of the Night. You're a lot more limited, but Julius has everything he needs to progress to the final boss. Unfortunately, there's no story for Julius. With a little planning, they could have made it to be what Julius was doing during Soma's adventure, and then crossed over with the main story. If you haven't played this one, and you like Castlevania games, you need to check this one out. It's a top 5 of the entire series, despite the fact that it's a bit short. Everything works in this game. The tactical soul system is integrated seamlessly, and is a lot of fun with almost endless customization. The map was also great to play through. Everything flowed together really smoothly, and it was very easy to backtrack with many paths leading to the main corridor, along with very well-positioned warp points. I never found myself completely lost or unable to progress due to not understanding what I needed to do to access certain areas. On top of that, there were a few puzzles to figure out, but nothing that even bordered on frustrating. A sequel was released on the Nintendo DS a few years later called Dawn of Sorrow, and that game continues Soma Cruz's adventure, improving on an already near-perfect game system. Let me know in the comments your thoughts and experiences with Aria of Sorrow. I'll be reviewing the sequel in the next video, so stay tuned for that one. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then.